I'm Röckët Stähr, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for joining the Matt Balaker podcast. Today, we have a really exciting guest. This guy is a New York-based singer, songwriter, pianist, guitarist, bassist, animator, and composer. He's my favorite rock and roll evangelist. He's the brains behind the rock opera feature film Death of a Rockstar, and he also created the intro music to this podcast. I'm honored to have with us Röckët Stähr. How you doing, Röckët?
Good, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well. And in preparation for having you on, I listened to some of your clips online and read about you. And I hope to be as passionate about anything as you are about rock and roll. I mean, it's just infectious. So what does rock and roll mean to you, Röckët?
Well, it means nothing to me. No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for joining.
More than that, yes, that was nice meeting you. It's everything to me, really. It's the music of course, first and foremost. Rock and roll, just the vibe of it, and I mean that in a wide swath of music. Everything from the Beatles to Metallica. But beyond that, for me, it's a way of living. It's a way of being. It's it's a fuck you attitude, if you can say that on your podcast.
You can, yeah, you can say fuck you attitude.
We can say whatever we want.
Exactly.
And I don't even mean that in like a completely negative way. I just mean in a being yourself, an individual, not being told what you can and can't do. It's a way of dressing. It's a way of looking. It's the posters on my wall. I can't see it real well, but that's Iron Maiden, Somewhere in Time. It's the videos. It's a way of talking. It's kind of everything to me. It encompasses all that I do in life, really, is with sort of the rock and roll attitude and with that kind of sort of passion and excitement that, to me, rock and roll music conveys. There's an energy to it at its best, that kind of really feels like living.
There's definitely an energy. And when did you discover that you have this in you, this rock and roll mentality?
All the way back to, I guess, when I was 15, which was, sometime in the late 1800s. I was, before that, I did love music. I had a real love for, I'll say it right now, 80s top 40 radio, because that's how far back this goes. And I little by little, I forget how I got into Queen a little bit. And then, Def Leppard's Hysteria was sort of breaking at the time. And even then I was still kind of in the top 40, but it was right then when Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction blew up and Sweet Child of Mine became like the massive hit. And it just sort of transformed me in my life, basically. I went from one thing to another and became like, literally within that summer, went from being like kind of a preppy sort of kid with short hair and everything to putting a motorcycle jacket on layaway and growing my hair really long and completely changing who I was. And I've been that way more or less ever since.
More or less ever since. We have a mutual friend who's been on this podcast called Lou Perez. And he found his love for comedy when he was in high school. And the topic of a article he wrote for the high school paper was about posers who go to concerts for bands that they don't even listen to. Like they might, buy a shirt the day before. You, Röckët, are the complete opposite to that. Like, when did you realize that you were sort of a rock lifer?
I guess not too long after that, when I was 15. In that regard, as far as like, starting to play guitar and starting to write songs and just listening to it and exploring the history of it and all that. It's basically that it's a long story to go from there to here, because I evolved and changed musically in about 98 different directions since then. But as far as like, I go to a lot of concerts. I know you had kind of wanted to talk about that and stuff.
I do, yeah.
And that's sort of a lifestyle my wife and I have taken on in about the past 6 or 7 years. And that kind of started with, we would go see bands periodically. I'm a big Fleetwood Mac fan.
Mm-hmm.
Gone to see them and usually had crappy seats, but this one time it was right when Chris McVie had rejoined the band, and we saw them the night before from, you know, like the second tier, and it was a great show. But the next morning we were like, that was so amazing, we'd love to see them again, they're playing tonight again, and it was Madison Square Garden. And we went on StubHub and we saw what we thought were like half decently priced tickets for the fourth row.
Wow.
Oh shit, well, let's get on those. So we bought them that morning, went to the concert, and I'd never seen a show from like the fourth row where you're right really there in the mix. And that just kind of like really sort of teed off being even more excited to see live things. Not too long after that, another long story made shorter, we started getting into Iron Maiden.
Okay.
Who I wasn't into back in the 80s for whatever reason.
So you rediscovered Iron Maiden 30 plus years later almost.
Started getting into them many, many years later. And my wife got really into them and wanted to go see them live. And they weren't playing quite in our area. And so we decided we're going to fly out to Vegas to see them, which felt really strange to me. Like, we live in New York City.
Yeah.
Like, so we're going to fly somewhere to see them. In fact, I told her at the time, let's not tell anybody. It feels really kind of extravagant.
Sure.
So
Jet settery.
It was great. You know, it was a little brutal being on the floor for it, but it was great. We were really close on the floor. And we kind of started seeing them. We booked a few shows after that from there. And it just sort of started snowballing. We were like, oh shit, this is exciting. It's awesome. Well, let's go see this artist here and let's go see them there. And it's become to where, you know, we travel a ton to see bands. I mean, this past summer we saw Guns N' Roses in Missoula, Montana, of all places. Alice Cooper in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Guns N' Roses there too. We saw the Black Crowes in Vegas.
Wow.
We saw, I mean, we've seen so many. We've seen Iron Maiden in Liverpool and London and you know, Toronto and you know, so yeah, we travel to see this stuff. It's basically our lifestyle. We have no kids, and anything we have, we just put into seeing as many of these acts as we can, because they're, you know, the stuff that I love is more classic oriented. The people are, you know, like, you know, closing in on being geriatrics. Some of them actually are. And, you know, so we're just trying to see as many of them as we can, and whatever connotation, you know, connotation isn't the right word, whatever form that they're in right now. Like the Black Crowes was 2 guys,
yeah,
and a whole other band. Guns N' Roses was 3 guys and a whole other band, but it's still, you're still seeing some version of those bands.
Yeah, well, you clearly found a good woman, Röckët, to be able to you know, follow bands around the world with you. And on one hand, this sounds fascinating. There's people out there who maybe work as an accountant, or they have a desk job that would dream about dropping everything and flying halfway across the country to see a band, and you're doing it. But like everything, there are trade-offs. So what are the costs of your vagabond lifestyle?
Money.
Well,
money and time, you know, that's really kind of it. I mean, mind you, it's not just us. Once you start doing it, especially, you know, like a band like Iron Maiden, it's kind of like a heavy metal Grateful Dead. Like,
yeah, I was thinking Fish or Grateful Dead. That's probably a better example. Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of like, we sort of are friends with people like all over the world through this. Like right before the pandemic hit, we were supposed to go to Moscow to see Iron Maiden and visit with our friends in Moscow who've been over here to see Iron Maiden. You know, that, so it's like we really know people all over the world that come here and go to a bunch of the shows, and we go to them. So it's just that kind of thing, like anything, you know. Some people chose to have kids. Some people chose to buy a nice house. Some people do this. For us, it's music. It's going to see these shows as much.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's the other week, my wife's sister was here in Southern California with her new boyfriend, and it's the kind of the first time he'd met the extended family. And I'd met him before, super cool guy, but we started talking, and his plan is to take her to see Iron Maiden in Mexico City, you know, and so I thought of you. I was like, well, maybe you guys have crossed paths before, but I mean, what's so different about seeing Iron Maiden in New York City, for example, versus Moscow? Like, how's the experience?
Well, different? I didn't get to see them in Moscow because it got canceled in the pandemic.
But hypothetically, yeah.
But you know, it's not really a difference, I'd say. you know, you might have more Europeans and when you go to see them in the UK or wherever, you know, but they travel here too. So, you know, it's just a different show. Like every night, it's a live performance. So even if a band like Iron Maiden does play the same songs every night, they're not a band who switches it up, but the performance is always going to be a little bit different. And it's always going to be a little more exciting. You might get a spot on the barrier this time. This time you might be 2 or 3 people back. And that's a whole ordeal in itself, waiting in line for like fucking 12 hours or the longest we've waited to get the closest spot on the floor. And that's really, that's because of my wife. I just take a seat. Quite frankly, she's even.
If everyone sits down, we can all see. If everyone sits down,
it's not even like me that's that obsessive about doing that. That's actually my wife who pushes.
Okay,
I'm like, I'll do it for her, and it's amazing though. What, you know, she puts us through it, but being up there when you're on the barrier of a show and there's, you know, 30,000 people behind you or whatever it is, and you're right there where everyone wants to be, and you know, Steve Harris comes up with his bass and is pointing at you and singing like 5 feet. There, you know, experiences like that to me, they're worth more than, you know, words can say or money can buy, even though money did buy them.
Well, you're getting something out of it. There's a lot of value to you,
and getting something out of it that it's almost hard to quantify. It's like you feel richer for it. You know, the experiences. It's like we'll go see them, then we go home, or we go to the bar real quick afterwards, have a beer, and we'll talk about the show, what was different about that one, and that kind of heightens the experience as well. You know, and then you'll reflect on what maybe Bruce's voice wasn't as good tonight. Maybe tonight this happened, or you know, one of the guys' guitars came unplugged, and just little things that, you know, it's hard to explain it if somebody's not that passionate about it. Like my mother's like, wasn't it the same show?
Yeah, can't you just listen to it on your computer? Yeah.
Well, you saw them already, right? Like, you can't really convey to other people why it's so important to you, or why you feel each one enriches you even more, you know?
When I was, I think, in 8th grade, I got to see Guns N' Roses and Metallica in San Diego. And
I saw them on that tour as well.
I guess those would be about 92. Yeah, the early 90s.
I saw them at MetLife in New Jersey. I was the Meadowlands in Jersey here with Faith No More opening.
Oh yeah, very cool. I think it was Ice-T had a rock side project. I forget the name. Body Count, I think, was the name of the band. So he actually opened for them and kicked ass. Like this was before he was a Law and Order TV star. But I remember my friend's mom drove us down, and we got to go to then Jack Murphy Stadium, and it was kind of like everything you hope for. Like there were girls like flipping their tops up, and I was like, oh, those are like boobs, and it wasn't like a blurry screen. And I was like,
there's something about that when you know, I got in the whole argument with a friend or a couple, and a really good close friend a little while back, because I posted something on Facebook about how I really do miss the days back then, because since Guns N' Roses got back together, we've seen them I think 10 times, or it was since Slash and Duff came back to the band, you know, all over to see them as well, because that's, you know, the band that teed it off for me and all that. And I was sort of lamenting how, like, you know, the shows were amazing, but like I missed back in the day when before the show, everybody was yelling, show your tits, show your tits. The camera would find some hot chick, and sometimes she wouldn't, and get a little embarrassed, and they'd eventually move on. It was like hard, but some would show their tits, and it was awesome. That's part of rock and fucking roll. I'm sorry.
It was like a dream come true. I mean, I was like, you know, I was prepubescent. I couldn't believe what I just saw.
And my friend was like saying like, oh, you know, you're a dinosaur, you know, get with, you know, get with the time. Yeah. That's not, you know, the way people behave now. And another person was like, you know, I don't go to one of their shows for that. They put the camera on me, and I thought it was awful. And I'm thinking, like, you know, you didn't go to see, you know, the New Kids in the Block. You went to Guns N' Roses. They used to have strippers on the stage.
Yeah.
You know, one of the lines is, turn around, bitch, I got a use for you. Besides, you got nothing better to do on board. What did you think you were going to see? You know, as long as nobody's touching anyone. And
right. It's all consensual. Yeah.
It's all just fun. It's part of the rock and roll fun. And, you know, and anyway, I got in a big fight, and, you know, but I don't disown that at all. I think that shit is great. I think it's part of the fun and excitement. It's part of fucking life. And I'm thinking, like, do you go to Mardi Gras and shake your finger at that? Like, people are still doing it there. They're still, you know, doing the beads for people flashing and stuff, and no one gives a shit. So why is it you can't do that at a rock show now, but it's okay to do that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that was, I mean, and beyond the titties, it was an awesome show. And then 20 plus years later, I moved actually right near the Sunset Strip, which it wasn't the same like excitement as the 80s heyday, but for me, it was cool. And I went with my wife. We had just been married like a year or so, and we saw a version of Guns N' Roses. I think it was pretty much just Slash, and Fergie was singing too.
Axl, you probably make it, well, because Axl had Guns after Slash left.
Okay, well, it was a bastardization. Like it was, and I remember I wasn't even that old, but it was in my early 30s, and like my legs were hurting, and I was standing, you know, like on cement for too long, on concrete, and I was like looking at my watch because we could actually walk there from our apartment at the time, and I was like, "Do you want to go home?" Like we didn't even care about an encore, and it was kind of a bummer because on one hand, yeah, musically it wasn't the same, but also it's like I realized I couldn't recreate the magic of being 13 or whatever it was. And you know, but like I see you, and I'm sure your experiences are different now than when you were 17, 18, 20, you know, like music, it's so nostalgic in a way. How does it stay interesting for you?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. It doesn't lose that magic for me. You know, especially the greatest of the great, the stuff that I really end up loving. Like sometimes I'll, you know, put on a pair of headphones, just listen really close to the speaker and listen to how it's recorded or what the one guitar is doing, what the reverb is on the snare. And it just sounds like magic to me. Like, how did they get it so right? That all just comes together. And I even know technically how this stuff is done, but I just find it to be the, you know, I just wrote a review of the Beatles, that documentary on Let It Be recently. And you know, the editor was giving me a bit of a hard time about my use of saying it's like magic multiple times in the thing. And at the end I said, it's real, honest to goodness, real life magic to me. And he didn't quite get what I meant by that, but that's what it is to me. It really feels like it's not somebody, you know, like, oh, watch this, I got two rings going together, and somebody telling you the truth. It's like, how did that happen? How did that guy sit down? He's just noodling on his bass, and suddenly he's doing what becomes Get Back. You know, I don't know. It's like, that seems like magic to me, you know, and I just find that to be beautiful. And it just, for some reason, there's so much out there. It's not like it's one or two things. So it just never really loses that sensation to me, that excitement. And, you know, and to me, I get what you're saying, like, oh, you can't go back and, you know, relive that experience when you're 13. And I heard somebody on, I think it was a Nick Gillespie podcast or an interview he did with a guy who wrote some book about having to do with Guns N' Roses or something. And he saw that first reunion show, and he kind of like put it down. He was like, oh, it's like they you know, they lost it. It kind of tainted my memories of what they used to be. Now some pop chick, he said, that she has like the kind of angst that they used to have back then. And I'm thinking, like, you're kind of missing the point by not letting them be the age they are now, but still getting that they're still going out and doing you know. I definitely feel like you can get the energy so long as they're not phoning it in up there.
Sure.
And I still get that when I go there. And, you know, Axl kills it up there, and Slash is killing it. Yeah, they have bad nights. We did see one night that we thought was bad out of the recent tour, and then we saw one a week and a half later, and it was just, they pulled out them. They played for like 3 hours, you know.
Wow.
They weren't phoning it in. We saw Madison Square Garden. They did 3 shows in a row. The third one, they played, I think it was close to 3 hours and 45 minutes. That's not a band that's phoning it in. That's a band that's loving what they're doing up there. They don't have to. They can go out there 2.5 hours and go home if they want.
Yeah.
And it's just, to me, that's just exciting.
Very exciting. Do you know, Röckët, what prompted the reconciliation, for lack of a better word, between Slash and Axl? Because I remember years ago thinking, like, they will never share a stage together.
I didn't either, and nobody really does except for them and Duff, I guess. Maybe their girlfriends and stuff know, but they certainly haven't revealed it. I know a slot opened up in the band, and one of them called the other, and they just kind of talked for a little bit and let bygones be bygones. But they genuinely seem to get along now, and Axl seems to be a much different person. It's in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Axl DC tour where he did well when Brian Johnson got briefly kicked out of AC/DC because they was having a hearing problem and they needed a singer to finish the tour. They brought Axl in. And at the time,
right? Now it makes
so he like would tour with them, and then suddenly he'd go on tour with AC/DC for 3 or 4 months, and then he'd go back on tour with Guns N' Roses. It was unbelievable, and the guy wasn't late once. And back in the day, I'm sure you remember,
he would wait like
3 hours for them to go on stage. So something changed in him dramatically, and so they get along now, and I just think it's beautiful.
Maybe it's magic or money or a combo.
I don't even think it's money. I think
you don't think so?
Enough money. Like I said, if it was, maybe I'm sure money has something to do with it, but if it was just money, why go out there and push the boundaries and do 3-hour, 45-minute shows when you don't have to?
Right. That's true.
Just seems to me that there's too much passion in it to be just about money.
Yeah. So what are some of the concerts or moments of concerts that stick out to you the most?
The biggest moment for me at a concert was 2 years ago. It was right before the pandemic hit. We went to see, for the second time, Aerosmith on their Vegas residency.
Okay.
And we, by complete coincidence, had the exact same seat. They were right on the catwalk that they walk out to. And what was amazing about these shows is that, nowadays, it's, back in the old days, there was no barrier between you and the stage. You could rest your arms on the stage a lot. If you watch old Jimi Hendrix clips or even Zeppelin and stuff, usually you were right up on the stage. Now there's like a security pit. So you're lucky if you're 5 feet from the stage, and then it's up here. At these Vegas residency shows, the stage was literally this high. So if you're right along there, your arms are right there and they're walking right by you. You could literally reach up and touch them if you don't want to get kicked out, or if you don't care about getting kicked out. So at the very end of the, through the show, like it was amazing. Like Aerosmith's one of my hero bands, from when I was a teenager. And, Steven Tyler's coming over and singing right into your face. And, Joe Perry's coming and standing right fucking there with his guitar. And at the very end, you're reaching out, waving, saying hi, and they're waving at you. And Joe Perry comes over and he shakes my hand and he slips me his pick. I was just beside myself because he doesn't, a lot of guitar players, they throw out a ton of picks of the show and you try to catch. We have on the wall, there's one of our little frame things of picks that we've gotten from Iron Maiden.
Oh, very nice.
We have a bunch more over there, but he doesn't throw very many out. In fact, I don't think he threw out more than one pick during that show. So of all the people, he came over to me and slipped me his pick at the very end of the show that he had just been playing with for a couple songs. And that to me was fucking magic, or like a rock god for somebody like me who looks up at these people as, gods in that variety, to reach down from the stage, from the platform that you worship them on, and to shake my hand and slip me a pick with the look on his face that he had, the thankful look, was just the most memorable moment. I don't think I'll probably ever top that as far as the show. And it's one of the shows also where it was like, it's one of those big bands and it's the whole actual band, not a different drummer, not a different bass player, not a different, Oh,
that's badass. I love that.
It's just wonderful.
Röckët, have you had a chance to meet any of these people in person that you grew up listening to?
Yeah, a number of them. I got to meet Slash at my brother's bachelor party years ago, many years
Sounds
ago.
Like a fun bachelor party.
It was pretty cool. I was, at the time, about a year and a half before, I was in the running to be the singer for Velvet Revolver, what became Velvet Revolver eventually. They had gotten a hold of my demo through my brother, my younger brother. He discovered and managed the band The Strokes.
Oh, yeah.
At the time, they had become
a small little band. No, they're huge.
And yeah. He managed them for like 20 years.
Wow.
And yeah. And so at the time, I just went into a whole story about it. They had become friendly with Slash and Duff and Matt Sorum and those guys. And I was in his office once, and he was telling me, I just got off the phone with Matt Sorum. Him and Duff and Slash, and at the time, Izzy Stradlin, are starting another band and looking for a singer. So it was basically Guns N' Roses 2.0, but without Axl. And I was like, what am I? The band that got me into music? Like, can you send them one of my demos? And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I guess.
Do me a solid, bro. Yeah.
And I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think that they'd even care for the type of music that I did. I just thought it would be really cool that I could get them, you know, a CD of songs I did. And a couple months later, I get a call from my brother. He said, you're not going to believe this, but Duff McKagan wants you to call him. Apparently, they love your voice and your songs, and they want to talk to you. So I get a call from Duff McKagan, or I called Duff McKagan, who, you know, again, bass player from the band that got me into music. And long story short, they sent me some stuff out, wanted me to write the vocals and the melody over it. I recorded it, sent it out to them, never heard anything. They bumped into my brother at some point, said they were excited to hear it, but they hadn't gotten a chance. Bunch of months later, eventually I heard they hired Scott Whelan. So I don't know, maybe they hated what I did, whatever. So anyway, the point of the story was, about a year and a half later at my brother's party, Slash and Matt Sorum happened to be in town and showed up. And he introduced me to Slash at the bar. And he's like, Slash, my brother, you know, the guy who, you know, auditioned for you guys for Velvet Revolver. And he was like, he was the greatest guy. He pulls me into it, and he goes, hey, man, look, you know, there was so much involved in that, you know, so much writing.
He was kind of put on the spot, too. That's a little bit awkward.
He didn't have to say anything. Yeah. Because there's so many other people. He could have just said, oh, nice. Good to meet you, man, and then turned away. But he pulls me in, and he's like, look, man, if it was just me, I just would have started working with you and seen how it went, you know, but there was so many people involved, blah, blah, blah. And I just thought that was the sweetest thing, because for all I know, they heard what I did, and they just thought it sucked and moved on. But it's kind of like he sort of took into consideration my feelings on it and just sort of said something to me. And, you know, when it's like he's like my ultimate guitar hero, it was like such a wonderful moment to have that, because they always say, don't meet your heroes, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess sometimes you can meet your heroes.
It was one of those moments where I'll never forget that moment, you know, like, because it's like he was actually kind to me in a way he didn't even need to be, you know? And so, yeah, that was one of the times I've met somebody at that level. And I worked at the Bowery Ballroom in New York City for like 8 years. So I met and saw all kinds of people there, Robert Plant and Joan Jett and Julian Lennon and just a ton of people from those levels, you know, would come down there.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you brought up the Slash story, because on one hand, you're clearly a fan, you're an aficionado of listening to music, but you're a very accomplished artist yourself. Like, how, you know, you compose, you play guitar, you sing, you play bass. Like, how did all this form, and how do you keep cultivating that talent?
I don't know. I mean, you know, it's like I started playing guitar when I was a teenager. I played piano when I was a little kid, but I never got really very good at it because I just didn't really give a shit too much.
So what was your first instrument?
Piano.
Piano, okay. It's a good one to start with.
Yeah, and that's still sort of my main instrument, even though I didn't really start getting any good until my early 20s when I sought out taking lessons again.
Okay.
But I did have at least a foundation of the instrument from being a kid. And it's still sort of my mother instrument in a way, to where, you know, I'm not great at any instrument I play, but I'm good enough to pull off what I want to do on them, to write my songs and think of the part I want to play, work it out, do it 98 times, and then record it. So, you know, one thing leads to another. And as a teenager, I discovered Guns N' Roses and want to play guitar. So then I pay for my own guitar lessons and take that from there. And then my very first band, we didn't have a bass player. So I was like, well, that's only 4 strings and guitar 6. Let me do that. So you go out and buy a bass and you're playing. So it's like one thing sort of leads to the other. And I had wanted to be a singer. So I started doing that when I was a teenager. And years later, when I was in my early 20s, I started bringing the piano back into my music again and wanted to have strings. So I started teaching myself how to orchestrate. And that's what led to be able to kind of compose and orchestrate things. And in my opera, my movie, it's all live strings and horns and all that stuff that I composed and hired the musicians to play. And so it's just that kind of thing. I've been doing it for a lot of years, and I'm, probably my biggest reason for lack of success on a commercial level is probably that I'm constantly moving from one thing to another. I never stay on one thing and then I'm trying to really push that for years. Right. I'm just like, oh, I want a punk band for a little while, for like 6 months. And I do that. And I learn how to write that kind of music. And then I'm really into Gordon Lightfoot out of nowhere. And I want to write some acoustic songs like that. So then I'm doing that and I record that. And then I move to doing the heavily orchestrated stuff because I've just been listening to Elton John a lot. And so and that's been the story for me for 30 something years, of moving from one to another. So I ended up with a lot of different types of songs and being able to write a lot of different types of music, all in that purview of rock and roll that I love. And I didn't know what to do with them all. And that's how I ended up, I put took one from here, one from here, one from here, and did the opera. And that's why the song that you're using for your podcast is to me, it was written to be a song like Slade. It ended up sounding kind of like a lot like Kiss. But that's one of the styles I write. Other music in that opera, it's kind of like Queen-esque. Other stuff is maybe Elton John-esque, and it all has a lot of me in there. But
so I understand the Death of a Rockstar was a 6-7 week project, start to finish. Am I right on that?
It took 13 years.
13 years. So what kept you motivated? You figure some people after year 8, they're going to throw in the towel, say the hell with this. What pushed you through the end?
It was kind of based largely on what I just mentioned, how I moved from one thing to another so quickly, so many times over the past several years before that I hit upon this idea. And people have been telling me for years that my music sounds like I should write a rock opera, I should do Broadway or something like that. And, I had loved things like Jesus Christ Superstar. The original record is one of the all-time great rock records, really. And, Rocky Horror Picture Show, which isn't a rock opera, it's a rock musical, but it's great rock music. And at some point I just hit upon the idea of maybe I should try something like that. I had just done a show that cost me a lot of money because I had a string quartet and it was a really good show. But I figured if I'm going to put all that money and time into something, I want to do something for posterity. Yeah. So not just that I do one night and then it's done. So I started working on it. And the reason I felt compelled to continue was because I wanted to prove myself that I can see something through in a long form way and not just bounce from this to then the next thing and that. And I would have been very disappointed if I started working on an opera, got through a bunch of the music, kind of started working on things, and it was like, I'm into something else right now. So it was extremely difficult. For a lot of those years, I wasn't a musician. 8 of those years, I animated entirely on my own. So I had to learn how to animate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did you learn to animate?
Just by doing, you buy. I didn't even want to or intend to do that. I know it sounds like a weird thing. I accidentally animated an opera.
I slipped, fell, and animated an opera.
I kind of did. Right? It's like I had originally just I was like looking on YouTube for a long time to try to find other animators to do it, naively emailing animation companies and being like, I have a script for something, I have a bunch of music, I want to do this rock opera, blah, blah, blah. And nobody, people were like, oh, it's a great idea, we love the music, but do you have $5 million or whatever?
Yeah,
no. I figured I'd start maybe I kind of downloaded or bought an illustration animation program and figured, okay, well, at least maybe I can come up with the characters and maybe draw a scene or something here and there. And if I could do that, maybe I can then show that to investors and try to, I'm a terrible businessman, but I thought maybe I can get investors.
Right.
I actually went to my very first, I think you know what Freedom Fest is.
Yeah.
Years ago, I went to my very first one of
Cold Fusion or rock operas. Where should we put our money, boss?
Exactly. And that was I went there hoping that I could find investors that would be interested in the very Liberty.
Do you have a business plan for your rock and roll lifestyle?
Right.
I need to see some pro formas here. What are the metrics?
How naive in thinking that I am that everyone would give a shit about that, So,
well, it's way less dumb than Twitter, and Twitter's gotten tons of financing. So,
yeah, I mean, I guess, but it's like, you think about it. I'm taking like the most unpopular genre of music, rock opera, and marrying it with like the most unpopular of political philosophies, libertarianism, and thinking that that's going to be a success.
Well, and adding it like in an expensive format.
Yeah, we'll get a great rate of return on this.
Yeah, it's not a 30-second clip. It's an actual like feature length.
Yeah, exactly, a feature length movie. And that's, so what I did is I started doing those drawings on the computer, and I got to one point, I was like, well, how am I going to explain to them how this goes to here? I was like, well, let me just try to animate this little quick thing that moves from here to here. And I did that, and I was like, well, that looks kind of neat. And little by little, it became, where I always describe it as, if you see something dirty, you wanted to clean a spot on something, and you clean that spot, but then it makes the whole rest of it. You realize, now I have to clean this, and before you know it, you've cleaned the entire floor, and you've
bulldozed the building. Yeah,
it was like that. I was like, well, now I better do this then. And then before that, before I knew it, 8 years later, I've animated an entire movie. And basically how it went.
So when you finally finished it, what was your reaction? What was it? Relief, excitement, like, oh shit! Like,
I took a very long nap. Yeah, I was very relieved to get the animated part done, but then I had to move on to. I mean, I had the music all recorded basically, but technology had advanced so greatly in the 8 years that I was animating it that I felt I had to go back and re-record the guitars and the bass and even the vocals and stuff that I had done at home on much crappier equipment when I didn't realize I was going to take it all that way. So I had to spend months doing that. And at that point, I had producers that were attached at that point. We parted ways amicably eventually. But they also wanted to submit it for some festivals that were coming up really kind of quickly at the time. And so I had to also teach myself how to mix the whole thing in an extremely difficult to mix environment. If anybody who knows anything about mixing music in an apartment on speakers that you share with your wife, and not a very good way to do something like that, especially if you've never done it before. And that was extraordinarily frustrating. And that all took many more months. So it's like there wasn't even any time I could hold on to the excitement of finishing the animation. One thing just moved to the other. And then I was finally done the mixing, just about to go to get it mastered for the movie, and the pandemic hit. Right.
Effing pandemics.
And fucked everything up, because that's where you're about to want to start getting into the film festivals and hope that they're going to, be shown in theaters, these festivals, and you're going to meet people, and it just fucked everything up. My timing is wonderful. So yeah, so there wasn't really that any kind of just one moment that I was able to really have that and enjoy in that regard, I guess. I think my most thrilling moment in a way might have been when it was first shown at a movie theater.
That's awesome.
Big screen. That was at Freedom Fest this past July in South Dakota, which was kind of neat because that brought it all back around to where I had kind of tried to take it to get financed many years earlier. It's run by Joanne Scalz, and a really wonderful, lovely lady. And she really loved the movie and accepted it in the festival. Despite the fact that it's, you get a lot of people who maybe aren't that receptive to, because it's, like we just talked about with rock and roll, sex is kind of part of the thing. So there's like, anatomically correct things going on. And, the lead female role has giant tits and, things like that. But she accepted it, and she's really supportive, and it got to play at what's, I think, the second oldest theater in the United States. And that was kind of a stressful moment in a way, because, oh my God, it's going to be on the screen. And I didn't think it sounded right at first, but like, that was a really amazing thing.
Could you sit still through it? You're in what was that like?
Kind of and kind of not, because like I looked like this because afterwards I had to do like a bit of a Q&A. So, I have to, be as I am.
Be in full makeup, yeah.
Yeah, I can't just go, as my regular self. but just, wondering, because you're also hoping for reactions, because it's, kind of a comedy, not like a ha 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 comedy, but, I've got to, might not get it from this, but I actually have a pretty good fucking sense of humor. So that's injected throughout the movie, I think, at least, but you don't know if other people are both going to get the joke, or even if they would get the joke, know if it came across, because trying to animate a joke to make the movements and everything work the way your mind is seeing it, you don't know if someone else is getting it. Mm-hmm. And luckily, people did laugh in almost all the right spots that you wanted them to, and that really felt good. And there was even some gasps, because there's a couple surprise moments through the end, and people actually gasped and all that, and that was really kind of cool, because it felt like, okay, it connected. It really did make those moments. And even for me, I was able to, a little bit into it, see it from an outside perspective, and even kind of feel for the thing myself, which I had never had before.
Very nice. So you finished kind of the ultimate passion project, and you get to show it at one of these oldest theaters, and so you've achieved something that pretty much no one can, or very few people do. But
it's the first animated rock opera feature film ever.
Very exclusive club.
But there's this, and they're usually talking about a rock musical, not an opera, where all the dialogue is sung. As far as I know, there's no other one out there. This is the first one.
You're a trendsetter, Röckët, for sure. So what is your ideal blend?
Like this, you just wait and see.
So you get to create music, but clearly you're a fan of concerts and live shows. What would be your ideal blend in terms of a perfect lifestyle of, would you rather be performing 90% of the time, watching 10, or what's the ideal mix for you?
I honestly don't know. I haven't performed properly on a stage in a long, long time. It's something I probably wouldn't do until and unless there's some money involved, if somebody who thinks that it's financially viable. I've done a couple of things online where I perform, I haven't done that even in close to a year either, but it's fun. I like to do it. But I would like to perform again someday, and a mix of the two would be great. I mean, I don't know what mix perfect. I'm first and foremost always a fan. So that's like kind of the biggest thing to me. And a lot of the best people, the people that I love, most of them aren't going to be around in another 10 years, unless some kind of scientific invention comes around that makes them youthful again. We just got Paul McCartney tickets this morning, and he's going to be 80 this June, I believe.
Wow.
So, eventually that's going to be a smaller and smaller part of whatever mix I would want anyway. So I don't know, 50-50, it's kind of an impossible question for me to answer, since I'm not actually.
Sure. Well, that's why I like asking the impossible ones. So do you ever have moments where just like, tonight, I want to listen to some Taylor Swift? Like, do you ever just take a sharp turn, and do you ever not listen to rock?
There's no Taylor Swift zone.
How about some electronic dance music? Like, are there any genres you enjoy outside of rock and roll?
Yeah, I mean, not Taylor Swift, and anybody who likes Taylor Swift, if that's your thing, fine. It's not mine. I don't mean to shit all over anybody else's idea of a good time and electronic, although I am getting into kind of sort of some synth stuff lately. I also am not a fan of rap at all. But I used to be a huge Beethoven fanatic, and Brahms. I love Brahms. These are the guys who've really influenced my composition side, that really kind of made me start bringing strings into my own music and learning that stuff. So I do listen to that, and we haven't gone in a while. We used to go to the opera occasionally. But
you're a very cultured rocker. I'm impressed.
I guess to that degree, but I listen to a lot. I still listen to a lot of 80s top 40 radio, and you can say that that's not rock and roll, and it's not really. Michael Jackson and 80s Madonna and even Prince, great as he is, that's not rock and roll, but it's great fucking music. For me, at least, I enjoy it a lot. But even like I said, rock and roll, when I'm talking about it, I can talk about it more of a pure level of the things that for me are, if you want to make the definitions, well, there's heavy metal, there's rock and roll, there's pop, blah, blah. like I said, we listen to a lot of Bob Dylan and Gordon Lightfoot and Cat Stevens and
Are there any bands that you're embarrassed to admit that you like?
There's not. Yeah, I know you mentioned that in an email, and I don't think there's anything that I'd say I'm embarrassed to admit that I love. I mean, I love listening to the Carpenters. Karen Carpenter is one of the most beautiful voices of all time, and I know back in the day that would be something a rock and roller would never admit. They'd hate that shit because it's soft or whatever. The Bee Gees are fucking great. ABBA. Not that they're my favorite things in the world, but I love a lot of what they do, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that. The stuff that I don't like, I don't have to worry about being embarrassed to admit that I like it because I don't like it. There's some stuff I can't even explain why I like. I just like it. Doesn't even fit in with if I philosophically think about what I think is good in music or not. It just, for whatever reason, sometimes something just moves you and you just go with it.
You just go with it. I like that. So I think I emailed you about this, but there's always people that want to find that undiscovered band. I grew up in San Diego, and Blink-182 was kind of underground for a while until they weren't. Then they're hanging out with like Carson Daly and on MTV every 5 minutes. So naturally, people hate them because they're famous. Like, does the commercialization of a band or artist that you saw kind of before the masses, how does that impact the enjoyment, if at all, for you?
It wouldn't bother me even in the slightest, except for the idea that like, oh, well, you can't maybe get as close for as cheap. But I mean, you have to remember, like, my favorite band of all time by and large, is the Beatles. So you don't get any more, famous or commercial than that, and then from there it's, Guns N' Roses and Queen, right, and Led Zeppelin, the biggest of the big that,
It had some commercial success, yeah.
Yeah, I don't give a shit about that. If you're being reactionary, if you don't like it because it got commercial, and I have no problem with musical. You mentioned musical snobbery in that email, and I guess it depends on how you would define it one way or the other, because I'm both into music snobbery. I think it's a good thing on some levels, and not into it on other levels. That's a whole discussion in and of itself. There's not many bands that the Strokes, I of course saw them when they were very small and in local clubs because of my brother's connection. And, I didn't give a shit. I was hoping, of course, that they got huge, but there's not many bands, if any, that I can think of that I knew when they were really small. Usually I discovered them because they were on the radio, or a friend told me about them because he heard them on the radio.
Right.
So I've just never given a shit about that. I just want it to be good. There are some small indie artists that I've loved that people probably hadn't heard of, that I had a tape of at one point, and I listened to over and over again because I was a fan of it, and I didn't give a shit that it was big or not. It's just not how I view stuff like that. I just want it to seem passionate and to be good, and to have great songwriting. That's all I really care about. And for the stuff that I don't like, we're talking about music snobbery. Yeah, I don't like Blink-182 at all. I can't get passionate, like you said, your friend did, about hating on an act like that. But I'll say things like, I just don't care for the Billie Eilish or, the Taylor Swift and things like that. But at the same time, I'm happy they exist because they're making other people happy. I don't wish bad on them, or I wish more people would like the stuff that I like.
That's so zen of you.
Or that would exist. Yeah. I'm happy. But yeah. I sincerely mean that. Like the stuff that I personally can't stand musically, if it's making a lot of other people happy, I'm surely glad it exists, because I know how much the stuff I love means to me. So I know how much that must mean to them, but at the same time, music snobbery as an artist, as a creator, and I think you'll relate some of this stuff as a comedian. And I'd love to talk to you about that kind of stuff, about writing and these things sometime, is that you need a little snobbery, because how else do you know what's good or not when you're writing? Right. You have to have standards, and I think part of the problem these days is people don't have as much standards with music or comedy, and they'll just say, oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. I love everything. Everything's great. It's like here and there, you should be like, no, that sucks, because otherwise
Nothing's, yeah.
How do I know if something I'm writing is good or not if I'm just like, oh, everything's good?
It's like that everyone's beautiful. It's like, no, some are more beautiful than others. Sorry.
There should be, you have to have standards. You have to have some things where you're like, no, that's great and that's shit. Because how do you strive as a creator, as a joke writer, or as a songwriter, if you don't say, no, this is what makes a good joke, this is what makes a good song? That's just stock. That's not.
That's stock. Yeah.
That's like any old guy on the street can come up with that.
Yeah, it's unoriginal. It's hacky. It's boring.
It's not original. It's not special. It's not something that's going to inspire me to better myself as an artist.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I think music snobbery is great. When I talk to my musician friends about why we hate this artist or why we like that, and that's where it's important. Where it's not, and where I think it's shitty, is where, like, if I'll see here and there a friend of mine posts, oh, I'm going to a show for such and such an artist, and it might be an artist I hate, so I don't say anything, but I'll see somebody else chime in, oh, they suck, why would you pay to see that? It's like, fuck off. Why would you do that to somebody and spoil they just made a happy thing about something that they're excited about and happy about. Nobody asks you what you thought about the band. It's the wrong time. So that
no one's forcing them. Yeah.
Like that kind of music snobbery, I think, is shitty. And now I think I'm answering a question you didn't ask. Hey,
that's perfectly allowed. Well, we definitely need you back, Röckët, because I've only scratched the surface of the questions I want to ask you, but this must come to an end. But for people out there listening or watching on YouTube, where can they learn more about you and some of the projects you might be working on in the future?
If you want to hear what I'm all about musically, I wouldn't say what I'm all about, but what I've done to this point that you can judge by whether you think I'm actually good at being a songwriter and singer and composer and everything. You can check out the soundtrack for Death of a Rockstar. It's actually fully called Röckët Stär's Death of a Rockstar. It's on Spotify and pretty much everywhere you can stream music. So take a listen to some of the music on there. It's very wide variety of stuff. And one of the songs Matt uses for his podcast here called Turn It Up Loud. And outside of that, the movie is, we have a distributor, Mutiny Pictures. It takes forever for this shit to go on, to be distributed online and all that. So I'm waiting on when the movie's finally going to be available on Amazon and other streaming platforms, hopefully some point later this year. So
very cool. Well, it's Röckët Stähr, Stahr. So be sure to check him out. Röckët, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you having me on.